we've done a lot of different discussions and trainings on AI. And more recently, especially since like December, January, everyone's been experiencing more of the agentic AI, not just like this conversational AI. What is that like from your perspective? What are you seeing that's different that maybe you can share of like, oh, it's like doing things, not just like talking to me?
Well, it's personally, it's eye-opening, right? It's
Yeah.
like, we try to go about it with the problems that we're trying to solve with, constraint-based thinking. That's
Hmm.
the big thought process. Okay, what is our constraint? How can we solve that? And oftentimes in the land business and in, a company like ours, it's time spent pounding keys or performing a function, in front of a computer pulling information. And you see, like, there's two things, like, we're trying to develop things that help us in our day to day, but then there's a whole other service side of the industry that's trying to run title and, query documents from a website. It's tied to, this, that, and the other. And you see it every day. These companies are really pushing the envelope to outsource some of that search. And it's kind of core to what the landman does. So in the next 2 years, there's going to be like this big decision point, this big inflection point where we've got to decide, what are we going to be comfortable with and what are we not? And what are we going to question? And how do you trust but verify, what an AI or an agentic, agent did that we would traditionally have a landman do, in
Yeah.
person? And, how do you supervise that? How do you guide it? How do you quality control check it? I mean, what are you willing to do? How much are you willing to rely on that? Um, Frankly, what's the pricing? What's the cost structure there? Um, what do we do as a profession to kind of address that? I mean, you think of things like surveying, right? Surveyors used to pull chains, chain to chain to chain, and then you get to a corner and then you nail a stake in the ground. And then it progressed on and on where they're looking, you got a guy out there and he's got a GPS and he's checking a corner and all that. Well, now they're flying things with drones and doing a lot of this work, automated type work, but someone still has to sign off on it, a licensed surveyor, right? And, we ask ourselves, is that where the land profession is going?
Yeah.
Or landmen going to be licensed now? And is that how you protect the integrity of the professional? Somebody has to sign off on that. And how does that work? And it's a difficult question, to
Yeah.
ask and to answer, really.
I mean, that's the only thing that you think about, like attorneys, for example, they're the ones signing off on all of this stuff because they've got their JD or whatever it is, and they're putting their bar license on
Mhm.
the line by signing off on it. And there's not anything that exists like that, which there's benefits there have been a lot of benefits for a long time to not having that in place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when you start seeing different threats to the industry, you have to consider some of the things that previously used to be the the preference, maybe no longer
Yeah.
are the preference.
I mean, the difficult thing is okay, you call brokerage company X and say, I need
Mm,
title done on these 6 sections. And broker company X does whatever they do to give you desired results, right? That's the
yep.
whole reason you outsource it. You don't control that process. You're not really involved in that process. You just know that a run sheet shows up, right? And then it goes to an attorney. And there's a disclaimer and a qualifier in that cover letter of your run sheet,
Right.
right? You're disclaiming, I did this, this, and this to come up with these documents. Well, at some point, where does an attorney say, like, hey, I'm opining as to these documents, but it's not worth the paper is written on because, maybe they used an agent, and to do that. And did they properly disclaim it in the run sheet or not? It's like
Hmm.
you're dealing with a bunch of independents. And who's to say that field landman isn't subscribing to one of these platforms in the future, for $100 a month to do their work for them, and they're doing it for 6 people, but they're putting their
I
name on
guarantee you
that
it's happening
disclaimer.
right now. It's already
It,
happening.
it is, and
I'm Not at
and
scale,
things
but
evolve.
there's a landman out there that's doing 6 different jobs and is, crawling websites and searching, doing data entry and all this kind of stuff and grabbing it and then reviewing it and giving it to someone. It has to be happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the old 2 days a day. I'm working 2 days a day.
Yeah.
But there's a whole another thing about that with pay and, layman day rates. I mean, people have to live, right?
Yeah.
And it's what you get. A plumber does the same thing. They may be working 2 or 3 jobs a day and you pay the price for swapping out a hot water heater, whether it takes them 1 hour or 6.
Right.
And so there's just going to be an evolution, I think. And it's a super difficult thing. I mean, you've got hundreds of different shops in our space, brokers companies, and we've done the research. I mean, we stopped at like 400 something different, companies that outsource land work. And the challenge is it's like almost the market has to evolve, and you got to have people out there that say, okay, we're not billing this way now, we're billing that way, we're billing by the job, we're billing, whatever it might be. And you got to have a customer base that supports that. And then maybe in time things evolve, and now you have a new way of going about this.
Yeah.
But that's all the things we're trying to figure out. It's like, what's it going to be? Nobody knows. But you have to just keep pushing and trying to do the best you can to be good stewards of the technology and try to retain and maintain what's really important about a landman and what the real value is and what's kind of sacred, for lack of a better term, to the profession. And you got to
Yeah.
maintain the integrity of the profession. And then let supply and demand take you where it takes you.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about like, what are the effects? You have these agents now that are going and helping with every aspect of the landman job, where now the entry level work, you still need the licensed landman, right? You still need the guy that, and I know that we don't have that yet, but just in the future, right? Licensed landman has to sign off on it. Well, they have the judgment, the experience, the knowledge to be able to sign off on it. They know what's right, what's wrong. They know when to push back, all those different things. Well, they gained that from being out in the field, from doing the entry level work of going into the courthouse, talking and finding the documents, all the different things, right? Doing the negotiations, all the lease work, title work. But now they can do some of that with an agent, that they don't need the entry level person anymore to go and do that. Well, that's great. We've got the 20-year landman who's wonderful at signing off and doing all that stuff. But in 10 years, that's a 30-year landman who may be out. And where is the 10-year landman who got that experience to be able to now sign off on things, if we're just giving that all to agents? And I think that's one of the things people talk about. AI is going to take over people's jobs, all this kind of stuff. And yeah, there's a lot of debate about that. But I think what's going to almost certainly happen is that there will not be as many opportunities for the younger generation to get into the industry, because it's going to be so much easier to just use an agent to do some of that work that the entry level would easily come into. And so companies are going to, and this isn't just specific to land, this is every industry. Companies are going to have to be very particular about guiding younger generation into roles that aren't traditional, that aren't what entry level used to be, and figuring out ways to get them the experience and the knowledge so that they have a workforce going forward, or else that's how AI will take over everything.
That's kind of the feeling that I have. You have to be deliberate about your development of your talent. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I was referring to earlier. Like, you go down into the pit, like, what are we going to do? And then you come out and say, well, damn it, I'm not going to let it happen. I have to renew my commitment to the mm-hmm. profession. And as a company, we have to be deliberate about, and as an industry, we have to be deliberate about the cultivation of that talent. And push back to a certain extent of like, okay, we're going to utilize these things, but you still have to maintain the integrity of what we do. And you mm-hmm. have to learn, and you have to work through that process. And I think we're going to be, I mean, there's some outliers. I mean, there's a lot of very tech forward people in the industry. They're trying to develop these tools. But the fact is, a big percentage of the industry is still that seasoned that landman, right? That's going to do it the traditional way, that knows better than to trust outsourcing that stuff. It's like, well, I'm not going to put my name on that. I didn't do it, right? And I think as an industry, we got to make sure that we're keeping that, we're really singing that song. You know, it's like, are you going to trust someone else's work, or are you going to trust your work? And as a, you know, the message to our clients, are you going to trust agentic work, or are you going to trust professional land work? And in time, that will evolve, and hopefully this next generation of landmen will have enough of that exposure as they're coming up and being taught to know, like, hey, I need to pump the brakes. I can trust but verify, you know, and they'll develop new methods of land work, right? You know, it'll be done a little differently. They'll rely on some agentic work, but they're going to, if you still have to be required to get into the weeds so that your intuition can kick in and say, that doesn't smell right.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to train the new generation of landmen to think critically in that way. And hopefully if we do our part, then we'll protect the integrity of what we're doing. And that's where we are now, right? We're in a big push in the company to hire new landmen, bring in trainees, like bring in a new workforce, and be very deliberate about that training, mentorship programs, all the things to kind of instill some of those like ironclad rules of doing land work, you know, especially from the title perspective. And so that's the path we're going. I think other companies are going to do the same. They should, if they're going to be responsible stewards of what we're asked to do as field landmen. And, you know, I'm holding out hope to a certain extent that the core of doing some of this work will be maintained, and they'll do it properly.